New York City, March 15th, 2023, 11:47 p.m. Times Square, the crossroads of the world, the city that never sleeps, the place where millions of tourists come every year to feel the electric pulse of Manhattan. Even at midnight, the massive LED billboards light up the streets like artificial daylight. Street performers are packing up their props, and yellow cabs weave through traffic carrying late-night revelers home. This is supposed to be one of the safest, most watched, most crowded places on Earth. But Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, Broadway actress, was about to discover that even in the brightest lights of New York City, something dark can hide in plain sight. And what happened to her on that March night would change everything we think we know about what walks the streets of Manhattan after midnight. This is the true story of the Times Square shadow. And I need to warn you right now that what you're about to hear is based on documented police reports, hospital records, and eyewitness testimonies that the NYPD classified and then quietly buried. Sarah had just finished her evening performance of Hamilton at the Richard Rodgers Theatre. It was a Wednesday night. The show ended around 11 p.m., and she stayed behind for about 45 minutes to help with costume cleanup and chat with other cast members. This was routine for Sarah. She'd been with the production for 8 months and had walked these streets hundreds of times. Around 11:45, Sarah left through the stage door on West 46th Street and started walking toward the subway station at Times Square, 42nd Street. The lights of Times Square were overwhelming as always, that sensory overload of colors and sounds and movement. And that's when she felt it, that primal instinct that every human being has, that ancient warning system that tells you something is wrong. Sarah pulled out one earbud and looked around. The crowds were thinning out a bit, but there were still people everywhere. Couples taking selfies, a hot dog vendor closing up his cart, a group of teenagers laughing loudly. The figure was tall, very tall, maybe 6'5" or 6'6", but the proportion seemed off in a way Sarah couldn't quite process. It wore a long, dark coat despite the relatively warm March weather and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of its face. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was how it moved. Everyone else on the street was walking normally, weaving around each other, looking at phones, chatting, existing in that casual urban way. Sarah went straight to the back of the store, pretending to browse the aisles while keeping her eyes on the door. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. Finally, she worked up the courage to look out the front window. The figure was standing on the sidewalk directly across the street from the CVS entrance, perfectly still, facing the store, not moving, not checking a phone, not looking around, just standing there, watching. Sarah looked again, and the figure was still there, clear as day, but the security guard insisted the sidewalk was empty, except for a couple walking past. That's when Sarah realized something was terribly, impossibly wrong. She pulled out her phone and tried to take a picture through the window. Her phone's camera app opened, but the screen immediately started glitching, horizontal lines cutting through the image, the app freezing and unfreezing. He immediately hit the emergency button that locked the automatic doors and called the police. Sarah backed away from the window, unable to take her eyes off the figure, and for the first time, she could see its face clearly under the hat. It was human-shaped, but wrong. The skin was too pale, not albino pale, but the color of old newspaper, slightly yellowed. The eyes were completely black. No whites, no iris, just solid black orbs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The officers took Sarah's statement, walked her to the subway station, and filed a report for public disturbance and possible stalking. The report was assigned a case number and then promptly buried in the system. But Sarah wasn't the first victim, and she definitely wasn't the last. Marcus Chen, 35 years old, financial analyst working at a firm in the financial district, had a similar experience exactly 2 weeks before Sarah's encounter. On March 1st, 2023, Marcus was leaving his office building near Wall Street around 11:30 p.m. after finishing quarterly reports. He decided to walk to Times Square to catch the N train instead of his usual subway because he wanted to grab food from a late-night place he liked. Marcus remembers the walk being normal until he reached the southern edge of Times Square, around 40th Street. That's when he noticed someone was following him. So he decided to confront whoever was following him. He stopped walking, turned around completely, and stared directly at the figure. In the bright lights of Times Square, Marcus got a clear look. The person was impossibly tall, wearing clothes that looked vintage, like from the 1920s or 30s, and had that same unnaturally smooth way of moving. But what Marcus remembers most vividly is that when he made eye contact with it, the temperature around him dropped so fast he could see his breath forming clouds in the air in March, in New York, where it had been 55 degrees just seconds before. The figure tilted its head to one side, studying Marcus, and then it spoke. Marcus swears it spoke, but the voice didn't come from its mouth. The voice seemed to come from inside his own head, a whisper that said just 3 words: you. A handprint in what looked like ash or soot, with fingers that were too long and too thin to be human. Marcus took photos of the handprint, measured it. The palm alone was over 6 inches long, and the fingers extended another 7 inches. He tried to brush it off, but the substance was almost burned into the fabric. He threw the jacket away the next day. Marcus filed a police report about being followed. He showed the officers the photos of the handprint. They'd just finished dinner at a restaurant on 42nd Street and were taking the obligatory tourist photos, even though they were both native New Yorkers. It was around 10:30 p.m. and the square was packed with people. Jennifer and Carlos were taking a selfie with the TKTS booth in the background when Jennifer noticed something odd in the photo after she took it. There was a figure standing directly behind them, so close it should have been touching them, but neither of them had felt anyone there. The figure in the photo was tall, wearing dark clothing, and its face was a black blur, like the camera couldn't focus on it properly. Jennifer showed the photo to Carlos, and they both turned around to see who had photobombed them. No one was there. They were standing in an open area with clear sightlines in every direction. Whoever or whatever had been behind them in the photo had vanished. Carlos suggested they just delete it and take another photo, but when Jennifer tried to delete it, her phone screen cracked. Not from dropping it, not from pressure. It just spontaneously developed a crack running diagonally across the entire screen. And then her phone got hot, really hot. So hot she had to drop it on the ground. Carlos picked it up using the edge of his jacket, and it was burning to the touch. Jennifer was conscious but disoriented. Her pulse was racing at over 140 beats per minute, and her skin was cold and clammy despite the relatively warm night. The paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, and Carlos rode with her to Bellevue Hospital. At the hospital, doctors ran every test they could think of: blood work, CT scan, EKG, everything. Jennifer's vitals were all over the place, but there was no medical explanation. No drugs in her system, no signs of heart attack or stroke, no allergic reaction. After 6 hours of observation, her symptoms gradually faded, and she was released. But one doctor, Dr. Patricia Holmes, a veteran ER physician with 20 years of experience, pulled Carlos aside before they left. She told him something off the record that she would never put in the official medical report. She said that in all her years of medicine, she'd only seen symptoms like Jennifer's a handful of times, and every single one of those cases involved people who claimed they'd encountered something supernatural. Dr. Holmes had a personal interest in unexplained phenomena and had been quietly documenting cases that didn't fit normal medical explanations. When Carlos mentioned the photo and the figure in Times Square, Dr. Holmes's expression changed. The figure in the background of the photo was not added digitally. It was captured by the camera in real time, but its physical properties didn't match anything in the real world. The figure absorbed light in a way that shouldn't be possible, creating an almost anti-shadow effect, and the blur around its face wasn't camera shake or motion blur. It was as if the entity itself was somehow incompatible with photographic technology. Dr. Holmes started digging deeper and found the police reports from Sarah Mitchell and Marcus Chen. She reached out to both of them, and when she brought all three victims together in early April, the patterns became undeniable. All three encounters happened in Times Square. All three happened between 10:30 p.m. and midnight. All three described the same impossibly tall figure in vintage clothing. All three experienced technological malfunctions around the entity. On April 5, 2023, she brought a team of 5 people, including a photographer, a paranormal investigator named David Park, who'd worked on similar cases, and 2 grad students from NYU studying urban folklore. They positioned themselves at different points around Times Square from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., all equipped with cameras, voice recorders, and thermal imaging equipment. For the first 2 hours, nothing unusual happened. Times Square at night is always bizarre, but it's a human bizarre, predictable chaos. But at 11:53 p.m., all 5 team members reported the same thing simultaneously over their radios. The temperature had dropped dramatically, at least 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The thermal cameras showed something impossible, a cold spot moving through the crowd, a human-shaped void of cold approximately 6.5 feet tall. David Park, who was positioned near the TKTS booth, actually saw it clearly. The same figure that the victims had described, moving through the crowd but not quite touching anyone, gliding rather than walking. David started following it with his camera, taking as many photos as he could. The figure seemed aware it was being followed because it stopped, turned, and looked directly at David. He said later that making eye contact with it was the most terrifying moment of his entire life, worse than any haunted location he'd ever investigated. The eyes were completely black, and they didn't just look at you, they looked into you, like they were reading every memory, every fear, every secret you'd ever kept. David held his ground and kept taking photos. The figure took one step toward him and then another, closing the distance rapidly despite appearing to move slowly. Tell them we have always walked among them. Tell them we are older than their lights, older than their buildings, older than their city. This is our hunting ground. These have always been our streets. And then it was gone, not walked away, not faded, just instantaneously not there anymore. David's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his camera. The team converged on his position, and he told them what happened. They checked his camera, and out of the 37 photos he'd taken, only 3 showed anything unusual, and those 3 showed only a dark blur in the shape of a person. The rest were completely normal street photography. But the audio recorder that David had running in his jacket pocket had captured something. When they played it back later, at the exact moment the entity spoke to David telepathically, the recorder had picked up a sound. It wasn't words, it wasn't even language. It was a low-frequency hum that hurt to listen to, like it was vibrating at a frequency that human ears weren't meant to process. Dr. Holmes compiled all the evidence they'd gathered, the witness testimonies, the medical records from Jennifer's hospital visit, the photos, the audio recordings, the thermal imaging data showing the impossible cold spot, and she prepared a comprehensive report. She submitted it to the NYPD, to the mayor's office, and to several news outlets. The NYPD response was swift and definitive. They classified the entire incident as mass hysteria and internet hoax, despite the multiple independent witnesses and documented evidence. The mayor's office never officially responded, and the news outlets? One small blog picked it up and wrote an article that got maybe 2,000 views before being buried by the algorithm. The mainstream media completely ignored it. But what's really interesting is what archaeologists found when they were doing excavation for subway expansion in 1998. Beneath Times Square, about 30 feet down, they found a mass grave. Dozens of bodies, maybe over 100, from the early 1800s, buried without ceremony, without markers, without names. The excavation was never publicized because it would have delayed construction and cost millions of dollars. They're drawn to places of death, to places where violence occurred, to places where people died forgotten and unmourned. And Times Square, underneath all those lights, underneath all that life and energy and celebration, is built on a foundation of death. Since April 2023, there have been at least 12 more reported encounters with the Times Square shadow, all following the same pattern: late night, between 10:30 p.m. and midnight, impossibly tall figure in vintage clothing, technological malfunctions, overwhelming sense of dread. The NYPD continues to classify these as unrelated incidents of public disturbance or hoaxes, but the people who've seen it know better. Patricia Holmes continues to document cases, continues to collect evidence, continues to try to get someone in authority to take this seriously. I'm finishing this documentary in October 2023, and just last week there was another encounter. A tourist from Japan took a photo in Times Square at 11:45 p.m. and captured something in the background. The same impossibly tall figure, the same black blur where the face should be, the same wrong proportions. Just leave. Get to a crowded area, get underground into the subway, get anywhere with lots of people and bright lights. And whatever you do, don't let it make eye contact with you, because once it sees you, really sees you, it knows you, and it might decide to follow you home. The Times Square shadow is real. It's out there, and it's waiting. If you found this investigation compelling, if you're looking over your shoulder right now, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because I'm investigating urban creatures and unexplained phenomena in cities around the world. And most importantly, leave a comment telling me, have you ever seen something in Times Square that you couldn't explain? Have you felt that presence? Your story might be the next one I investigate. Remember, not everything that walks the streets of New York City is human. Some things are much, much older, and they're still hunting. It's a walk she'd done countless times, maybe 5 blocks, usually taking 10 to 15 minutes. The streets were still busy with tourists, theatergoers heading home, restaurant workers finishing shifts. Sarah remembers feeling good. The show had gone well. She was thinking about the weekend, planning to visit her sister in Brooklyn. She walked down 7th Avenue, her phone in hand, earbuds in, listening to a podcast. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger. Sarah quickened her pace, both earbuds out now, senses alert. She glanced over her shoulder, and that's when she saw it. About 30 feet behind her, moving through the crowd but somehow separate from it, was a figure, a person, or at least it looked like a person, but something about it was fundamentally wrong. But this figure moved with an eerie smoothness, gliding almost, and it was staring directly at her. Even from 30 feet away, even with the hat shadowing its face, Sarah could feel those eyes locked onto her like a predator tracking prey. She did what any smart New Yorker would do. She didn't run, didn't panic, just changed direction quickly and walked into the nearest open business, a 24-hour CVS pharmacy on the corner of 44th and 7th. And despite the brilliant lights of Times Square illuminating everything, the shadow it cast was impossibly long and dark, stretching across the street like a black stain on the pavement. Sarah walked up to the security guard near the door, a middle-aged man who looked bored until he saw her face. She asked him if he could see the tall person in the dark coat standing across the street. The guard looked, squinted, and said he didn't see anyone matching that description. She tried 3 times, and on the 3rd attempt, just as she managed to snap a photo, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It didn't turn. 1 second it was across the street, and the next second it was standing directly outside the CVS window, separated from Sarah by maybe 3 feet and a pane of glass. Sarah screamed. The security guard spun around and later told police he saw nothing but his instinct took over when he saw how terrified Sarah was. And when it smiled, because it did smile at her, the mouth opened too wide, the corners extending almost to where ears should be, revealing teeth that were all the same length and filed to points. The police arrived 7 minutes later. By the time they did, the figure had vanished. Sarah showed them the photo she'd managed to take on her phone, but when they looked at it, all they saw was a corrupted image file, completely distorted and unusable. Not aggressively, not obviously, but definitely following. Every time Marcus turned a corner, within 30 seconds, the figure would appear behind him. Every time Marcus stopped to look in a store window, the figure would stop too, always maintaining the same distance of about 40 to 50 feet. Marcus is not someone who scares easily. He's 6'2", goes to the gym 5 times a week, and grew up in Queens. He's dealt with plenty of sketchy situations in New York. Should run! Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He ran, sprinted full speed through Times Square, dodging tourists and performers, not looking back until he reached the subway entrance. He jumped the turnstile, which he'd never done in his life, and stayed on the platform surrounded by other people until his train came. When he got home that night, Marcus found something that made his blood run cold. There was a handprint on the back of his jacket. They suggested it was probably just some street performer trying to scare him, maybe part of a viral video prank. The report was filed and forgotten, but then came the third victim, and this one couldn't be ignored because this victim ended up in the hospital. Jennifer Rodriguez, 42 years old, high school teacher from the Bronx, was in Times Square with her husband Carlos on their wedding anniversary, March 22, 2023. They decided to just go home, spooked by the weirdness of the situation. But as they were walking toward the subway station, Jennifer started feeling sick, dizzy, nauseous, like she was about to pass out. Carlos caught her as her legs gave out and she collapsed. Someone in the crowd called 911 and an ambulance arrived within minutes. She asked him to send her the photo if he still had it. Carlos said Jennifer's phone was destroyed, but he'd try to recover it from cloud backup. 3 days later, Carlos managed to retrieve the photo from Jennifer's iCloud account and sent it to Dr. Holmes. She sent it to a colleague who specialized in digital forensics and photo analysis. The analysis came back with results that were impossible. And all three reported that same primal fear, that instinctual knowledge that they were in the presence of something that shouldn't exist. Dr. Holmes decided to do something that would risk her professional reputation. She organized a nighttime observation in Times Square. Other people in the crowd were walking right past it, completely unaware of its presence, which made David realize that for some reason, not everyone could see it. Maybe it chose who could see it, or maybe only certain people were sensitive to whatever it was. When the figure was about 10 feet away from David, it stopped, and then it spoke. Not out loud, but David heard it clearly in his mind, the same way Marcus had. It said, "Witness, record, tell them we walk among them." But here's what Dr. Holmes discovered through her research that makes this story even more disturbing. Times Square hasn't always been Times Square. Before it was covered in LED billboards and Broadway theaters, before it was the crossroads of the world, it was called Longacre Square. And before that, in the 1800s, it was a rough neighborhood known for violence and poverty. And before that, in the 1700s, it was farmland. The bodies were quietly relocated to a city cemetery, and the project continued. Dr. Holmes believes that whatever is walking through Times Square, whatever Sarah and Marcus and Jennifer encountered, whatever David photographed and heard, is connected to those forgotten dead. In folklore from dozens of cultures around the world, there are stories of shadow people, entities that exist in the space between life and death, between the physical and the spiritual. They know that something walks the streets of Times Square after midnight, something that was there long before the lights, something that will be there long after the lights go dark. Sarah Mitchell doesn't walk through Times Square anymore. She takes a longer route to the subway now, even though it adds 15 minutes to her commute. Marcus Chen moved to California 6 months after his encounter. Jennifer and Carlos Rodriguez haven't been back to Manhattan since that night. And Dr. The photo went viral on Japanese social media before being removed for violating content policies. But I have a copy, and I've seen it, and I believe. If you're planning to visit New York City, if you're going to walk through Times Square, please be careful after dark. If you feel that sudden drop in temperature, if you feel like you're being watched, if you see a tall figure in vintage clothing that doesn't quite move like a human should, don't try to photograph it. Don't try to confront it.